One of these two is the best budget phone you can buy right now. This is the Pixel 7a and this is the Galaxy A54. They both sell for between 450 and 500 of your favorite currency, depending on what spec you go with and which deals you take advantage of. Both the 7a and A54 have different ideas about what a great budget phone should be, and while this hasn't been an easy decision, there is an overall winner here, and the reason why could be a bit controversial. I'm Alex Dobie, this is XDA TV, let's dive in. So both Google and Samsung have tried to distill the essence of their respective flagships down into a more affordable package. As such, you've got iconic design elements here recreated with a thriftier touch, and both phones look pretty attractive considering their price point. Google swaps out the more expensive Pixel's glass back panel with plastic while retaining the metal outer frame. Meanwhile, Samsung has a glass back, but that's framed inside an undeniably plasticky feeling border. For that reason, I have to give this early win to Google for one simple reason. In a phone of this size, your main contact points are the sides of the device, and the A54 sidewalls just feel cheap compared to the 7a. Although the Pixel's rear panel is plastic, the part that you're actually gripping most of the time is metal. That might sound like a really small detail, but when you have these two side by side, it makes a big difference in which one feels more premium. On the other hand, the Galaxy gives you a larger 6.4-inch viewport that's going to feel roomier in games and other kinds of media. And it manages to boast a faster refresh rate too, 120Hz versus the Pixel's 90, though honestly I think you're going to be hard pressed to tell the difference in terms of smoothness. 90 to 120 isn't as big a deal as going from an old 60Hz panel up to 90. Otherwise, both displays are excellent, promising an ample 1000 nits of peak brightness, and even using them out in the sun with sunglasses, both were more than legible in my testing. Being cheaper handsets, you've of course got to deal with a bit of a chin area down below here on both phones, but at this price point that's easy to live with. Audio-wise, both phones have a twin speaker setup with the earpiece backing up the bottom firing loudspeaker. I noticed a higher max volume from the A54, though with slightly less balanced output than the Pixel, which seemed to preserve more mids and bass. Where you really start to get a feel for the different priorities with these phones though is when taking a top-down view of that spec sheet, and that really starts with the SoC. The Galaxy A54 runs an Exynos 1380, a mid-tier Samsung chip, but the Pixel uses a Google Tensor G2, same as the more expensive Pixel 7 Pro, which is basically a flagship SoC. This chip comparison is all the more interesting for phone nerds like me because Google's Tensor is loosely based on Samsung's higher-end Exynos chips. That being the case, the main upgrades you'll see from the Tensor chip are the two faster Cortex-X1 cores and the beefier GPU. In my testing, that doesn't result in any huge performance gains in regular day-to-day apps, but if gaming is a priority, then the Google Tensor definitely has an edge. There's only one Pixel 7a variant with 8GB of RAM and 128 of storage. The A54 comes in a few different flavors, 6+128, 8+128, or 8+256. I've been using the 8+128, which is the base model sold here in the UK. If you're in a country where the 6GB version is sold, I definitely recommend stumping up the extra cash to upgrade to 8 if you can. Over 2 or 3 years of use, you're just going to have a better time with 8GB of RAM when it comes to multitasking and things like that. The Galaxy A54's larger size helps it fit in a 5000 mAh battery, the same capacity as the flagship S23 Ultra. This, combined with a less powerful SoC, helps the A54 sip power in day-to-day tasks, so it's easy to get a full day and into a second with the A54. The Pixel, by comparison, is really nothing special in terms of its longevity. A single day per charge at best, and with heavier use you may want to consider an early evening top-up. And Samsung also offers faster wired charging too, up to 25 watts over USB-C. So the Pixel falls short of that on all three metrics: a smaller cell at just under 4400 mAh, slightly weaker longevity, and slower refills at just 18 watts. But it does come with one key convenience that Samsung's missing: wireless charging. Sure, it's super basic wireless charging at a measly 7 watts, but for those opportunistic refills throughout the day, it's a great feature to have. It's part of what makes the 7a's very pedestrian battery life feel more okay to me, since I can just plop it down on the charging pad when I'm making lunch or whatever and regain a few percent throughout the working day. Photography is another key area where cheaper phones like these are getting better all the time. And looking at the back of these two, you might expect Samsung to have an advantage. After all, it's 3 cameras versus 2, right? But it turns out this is one of those times when less is more. That's because the third lens of the A54 is one of those extra cameras that's largely just for show. Not quite as useless as a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera or a 3 megapixel monochrome, but close. It's a 5 megapixel macro, which works fine I guess, but requires a lot of light to produce decent kinds of shots and just isn't something you're going to use on a day-to-day basis. Otherwise, with both phones you're dealing with a standard combo of wide plus ultra wide, with the Pixel boasting a higher resolution though smaller overall sensor size. And these two camera setups, in my experience, are fairly closely matched, with one or two key differences. The biggest one you'll notice in almost every shot has to do with the white balance and color vibrancy. Samsung routinely takes photos with either an excessively warm or cool look to them, it really does vary from shot to shot, and a more saturated color profile to boot, to the point where in some images like this building here, there's a dramatic difference in what your eye sees versus what the camera captures. The extra warmth sometimes makes for a more pleasing photo, but the Pixel definitely takes shots that are closer to what your eye actually sees. Some areas in particular, like the red here, come across as excessively vibrant in the shot from the Galaxy. It's like you've grabbed the contrast slider and just pulled it all the way up, whereas again the Pixel captures the brightness of the red paint but in a more natural looking image. And yeah, the less said about what Samsung's doing to the water here, the better. Otherwise, both ultra-wide cameras offer up a similar field of view, and I felt confident in their ability to take great photos in good to middling lighting. Though once again, you really see the difference in colours and contrast here with the blues and greens. Samsung's definitely giving you more saturated, processed looking shots. The biggest win from the Pixel undoubtedly is in telephoto performance. Sure, the Google camera has a slightly higher native resolution, but I think what's helping Google pull ahead of Samsung here is its Super Res zoom technology, which uses the motion of the optical stabilization module to capture more detail in shots at 2x to 5x. In side-by-side comparisons here, it's not even close. The Pixel 7a easily produces images with much more fine detail at pretty much any zoom level above 1x. With the Galaxy, more noise and grain is visible in these shots, and it's just much closer to a traditional digital crop. In low light, once again, the biggest difference you see is in color temperature. The output of the Galaxy here is warmer than you'd see with a naked eye, and while it's still a perfectly fine looking shot, it is a little overcooked compared to the Pixel version. And while neither ultra-wide does a great job in low light, I think the Pixel pulls ahead just slightly here, capturing more color detail when you zoom in closely. Video-wise, these two phones are also fairly closely matched, but with the Pixel able to boast one or two key advantages over the Galaxy. Its faster chip helps to enable 4K video at 60 FPS, which, while far from essential, is definitely a nice to have extra at this price point. And speaking more generally, the Pixel's rear camera was a bit more consistent than the Galaxy's in moving footage, particularly when using the ultra-wide camera. While the main sensor produces great optically stabilized footage on either device, I noticed more sharpening artifacts and fine detail being lost in footage from the ultra-wide on the Galaxy A54. And Samsung's colors often weren't as consistent when switching between the two lenses, as you can see here with the much warmer output when we switch to ultra-wide. And I also noticed the Pixel was able to handle more challenging dynamic range more confidently than the A54, especially when using that ultra-wide. Overall in photography then, I think it's a win for Google, but the areas where the Pixel pulls ahead are fairly situational, and Samsung still offers a really solid camera considering the A54's price. The software of both the A54 and Pixel 7a presents yet another example of how different these phones' priorities are. Samsung's One UI and Google's Pixel UI, while both based on Android 13, don't look much alike at all. The Pixel leans into Google's Material You design language, with wide curves, bold typography, and colors ripped from your wallpaper. On the Samsung side, it's a bit more subdued, with legacy Android influences like on-screen keys by default and rounded quick settings shortcuts. And One UI also borrows a few iOS influences, like a long press on the lock screen to customize it, and the widget stacking feature, where you can swipe through multiple widgets in the same place. When I'm using a Samsung phone, I appreciate things like the robust multitasking, the windowed mode, and the tight integration with the rest of the Samsung ecosystem like SmartThings. The depth of the Galaxy software experience is also something you won't find anywhere else on Android, even on a Pixel. Modes and routines lets you automate tasks in granular detail using all of your phone's sensors and features. It's kind of like a superpowered version of IFTTT. And if you want to customize even further, then GoodLock lets you pop open the proverbial hood and tinker with the way individual features work. For what it's worth, one thing you do miss out on with the A54 compared to pricier Galaxies is DeX, Samsung's desktop replacement feature, which turns your phone into a miniature desktop PC when connected to an external display. That's exclusive to the S and Z series. The Pixel is much more about ambient computing and using Google's AI to help you out day to day. The 7a, like other Pixels, can identify music in the background, automatically translate chat messages, and even unblur faces in old photos. And Google's commitment to quarterly feature drops means the 7a will get even more features like this throughout the course of its 3 years of Android OS updates. But wait, Samsung actually offers an extra year of software support with the A54, taking it up to Android 17 in 2027, while matching the Pixel's 5 years of security patches. The key difference to watch out for here though is that you'll likely wait a bit longer for updates on the Samsung side. With the Pixel, as long as it's supported, updates will be available on day one. So it's a tough call as to which of these really is the better phone at around the $450 to $500 mark. I think the Pixel wins on build quality, performance, and camera, though Samsung manages to stay competitive with a larger, quicker screen and better battery life. In my view though, if you were to force me to use one of these for the next couple of years, the core experience of the Pixel combined with a more versatile camera setup, the extra convenience of wireless charging, and superior build quality are enough to sway me in favour of Google's budget flagship. But the A54 has plenty going for it too, and if your priorities include a larger screen and longer battery life, there is an awful lot to like here. So let me know which one you picked down in the comments, and be sure to subscribe for more comparisons like this one, we really appreciate it. In the meantime, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.